Welcome to the bonus episode for this month of the MMA Vlogcast. We are going to be covering Cage Warriors 172, which is headlined by a vacant featherweight title fight between Harry Hardwick and Orlando Wilson Prins, or Prins Wilson, however you want to throw those last two together. Decent card all around going down in Newcastle. I believe there was 15 or 16 fights scheduled at the beginning of the week, but we've had some pullouts and one weigh-in mishap as well, which has now brought the card down to 12 fights. Still, regardless, no UFC this weekend. At least we got Cage Warriors going down, and we do have a few other cards, but this is the one that I'm focusing on to at least give a breakdown for you guys, to the public, that is. Now, if you are interested in regional breakdowns, I only do one for the public, like I said, on a monthly basis, but I also cover a plethora of them on the Lock of the Night Patreon page in written form. So not only do I cover the UFC, but I cover Bellator, PFL, Contender Series, LFA, Cage Warriors, ACA, KSW, and OKTAGON, all on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So there is a ton of content for you guys to digest and consume, or even track plays and all that stuff to keep up with your boy. And the best way to do so is to check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link to that in the description below. Another very useful service and Patreon page that I host is the MMA Fight Archive. That is how I am able to study up on all these upcoming fights, specifically these regional events, so I can give you guys the best information possible, make the best prediction possible as well. But it also gives you guys an opportunity to do the studying and ensure that you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. So on top of the promotions that I just stated for you guys that I cover and research myself, you can find those events on the Fight Archive, but you can also find CFFC, Fury FC, Aries FC, Invicta FC, Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, Brave CF, Risen, and UAE Warriors. We have over 30, I think we've surpassed 3,700 fighter profiles on there as of right now. The goal is to get as many fighters on there as possible, but we focus on those promotions that I've already listed. And next year we'll be adding, probably 2-3 more promotions and continue to do that year on year, so that we can get this, to be the one-stop shop for anybody that's looking to research these upcoming events. Not only do we have some of the top gamblers and analysts on the service already, but we have fighters, coaches, commentators that utilize the service to ensure that they're able to do the best researching they possibly can. There is a 7-day free trial for you guys to check it out. So check it out once again, the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. Do your own researching and see how it comes out, and if you guys can go up against my predictions or even just utilize it to make your own bets as well. All right. This is a chalk-heavy Cage Warriors card. This seems like a fight card that a lot of opponents or fighters have been set up to go out there and perform in front of their home country, hometown, whatever it is. Go out there, have a dominant performance, have a highlight reel performance, and try to throw their names into potentially getting onto the Contender Series or get noticed by one of these bigger organizations. So not a lot, if any, underdogs that I'm really liking on this card. So if I'm just cherry picking favorites here, it's not just I'm looking at the odds and saying this person is going to win. I did my researching, then I make my predictions, then I look at the odds, and it just so happens that I pretty much side with every single favorite on this card, with the exception of one spot that's a very close fight, and we'll see that very shortly. So again, when there are chalk heavy cards, there are going to be landmines, but there really isn't anything that I'm looking at on this card to be like, this could be a potential big upset that we can see. I'll let you guys know if there is one that I'd be like, okay, if I were to pick an underdog, it'll be this one. But again, very chalk heavy card that I'm expecting for this weekend. All right, so let's get right into it. I'm going to get through these as briefly as possible for you guys, not as deep as I like to get with the UFC. So let's do it. First fight of the night, Jordan O'Neal coming in at -500, going up against the Doris Serdes, who's coming in at +375. O'Neal started his amateur career 0-3, now has gone 5-0 on the amateur scene, as well as picking up 2 more wins on the professional scene. He likes to take a grapple-heavy approach, taking his opponents to the ground. Has a sneaky choke game as well that he's been able to implement. His opponent, Serdes, was riding a 2-fight losing streak, or sorry, he was riding a losing streak before taking off 4.5 years, then returning in 2023 and pulling off 2 straight victories over super tomato can level opponents. He's a slugger, likes to go out there, put big power on his opponents, has horrible takedown defense, and really no means to get back to his feet. However, we do have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he may have made those improvements during his time off, but there just has been no video evidence of him actually utilizing it defensively as of late. So maybe he is one of those guys that could potentially pull off an upset here. But given the level of competition that O'Neal has been going up against and the skill set that I've been seeing from him, I think he goes out there and wins this fight. Minus 500, a little bit too wide for my liking. Next up, Jackson Clarke coming in at minus 110, going up against Faudel Bentayeb, who comes in at minus 110 as well. Pick 'em fight here. Clarke is a guy that seems to be relying on his BJJ development to try to go out there and get some of his wins. He's now a BJJ purple belt, has been competing in grappling competitions, but it seems like when he is losing, he's either getting outstruck or grinded out from that top position. And he does show some decent work off of his back at times, but if you have good enough submission defense, good enough top control, you can grind him out and really wear on him. His striking, again, very basic, can throw in combinations, but when he's fighting better strikers, which he is this weekend, he can normally find himself getting into uncomfortable positions, making bad decisions, and I think that's where we'll see Faudel really start to take advantage of him here. Depending on the bookie that you're getting here, you can either get this at pick-em odds, or you can even get Faudel as a minus money underdog coming in around that minus 105 range, which I was able to get over there at Bodog. But I do think that Faudel is the better striker here, and I think the gap in the striking realm is far more than the gap that is in the grappling realm here. So I think we'll see Faudel keep this fight in the striking realm, and even though he has a salty 4-4 record, he's been going up against some decent competition at this stage of his career, and I think we'll see him go out there and touch up Jackson Clarke and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got Charles Joyner coming in at minus 500, going up against Albert Serpeti, comes in at plus 375. Both these guys are lengthy strikers, but it's clear Joyner is a little bit more dangerous in that realm. Both of these guys have had grappling defense issues in the past, but I'd be surprised if either one of these goes to exploit that from their opponents. But I do think that Joyner showcases a much superior striking game here, utilizing his step-in knee whenever opponents try to crash the pocket, but he also has a very nasty body kick, which is how he's been able to win both of his professional MMA wins. His only loss was a fight that was very close going into about a round and a half, which is where his opponent was able to take over with some grapple heavy approach or some grappling grinding. But I do think that Joyner is the superior striker here, and I think he might end up getting another body kick KO in the spot. But at minus 500, not a bad spot. Again, if you're looking at this fight card as a whole, we have so many minus 500, minus 400 favorites. Joyner is probably one of the better ones as well. Next up, Joe Fields coming in at minus 185, going up against Tom Wright, who comes in at plus 155. Joe Fields is a BJJ brown belt and showcases a very solid all-around game. He likes to chip away at the calf of his opponent when he wants to just fill the gap in terms of activity, but he's also very strong in terms of getting that top position and holding his opponents down, or at least looking for submission opportunities. He had a very successful amateur career where I believe he went 7-2, and his last loss, which was his last amateur fight, was a 5-round title fight where he lost by split decision. Was looking very good through the first 3 to 4 rounds before he started to slow down, and his opponent was able to take advantage of him. I like what I see from the kid. Seems to have a lot of potential, and he seems to have all the chops from an all-around MMA perspective. His opponent this weekend, Tom Wright, already made his Cage Warriors debut, where he was able to outstrike his opponent and finish him at the end of the first round. But that was a fight where it seemed like his opponent really started to slow down, and something that he's had an issue with in the past, which is where Wright was able to really touch him up and then eventually sink in that choke where his opponent just insta-tapped because it seemed like he was out of breath already and really didn't have what it took to fight off that choke. Wright, like I said, solid striker. Where opponents have taken advantage of him in the past was in the grappling realm, taking him to the ground and really grinding him out from that top position. And I think that's what we're going to see from Joe Fields here, who should be able to set up his grappling game well, utilize that calf kick, throw some combination strikes, and then eventually mass some takedowns behind that, and then get to work with his BJJ brown belt. I think that will see him come out victorious here, and I think it ends up coming on the scorecards. Next up, Joe Ambler coming in at minus 175, going up against Michael Tchamou, who comes in at plus 145. Ambler is a guy that likes to utilize a grapple-heavy approach in his fights as well. His lone professional defeat came to, I believe it was Jordan O'Neal, who fights earlier on this card, and that was a fight where Ambler was a little bit too lackadaisical with his takedown-heavy approach, got a little bit too desperate, and ended up in a high-elbow guillotine, which he was ended up forced to tap in. But this is a fight that's a guy that likes to go grapple heavy, goes position over submission, so doesn't often give up bad positions trying to go for a finish, and he's content with just grinding his opponents over the course of 9 minutes on the amateur scene, 15 minutes on the professional scene, and that's going to be something that Tchamou will struggle with in this matchup. Obviously, Tchamou very difficult to deal with early, big power, could sneak in a choke of his own if Ambler is a little bit too lazy like he was against Jordan O'Neal, but Tchamou clearly slows down in that third, fourth, fifth minute of fights. If he's unable to finish his opponents, he really starts to wear down and he makes it difficult for himself to try to find a finish. He doesn't really have the ability to manage his gas tank, or at least a power late into fights, like guys like Derek Lewis, who normally get outworked in their matchups, but still have that big power to uncork on their opponents. And I think if he's unable to get that early finisher, he is going to struggle to deal with the pace and pressure of Ambler. So I think Ambler wins this fight over 1.5. Maybe he gets a late finish, maybe wins by decision, but I do think he's the better overall opponent here. But he needs to survive that first 2 to 3 minutes of the chaos that Tchamou will be bringing to the table. All right, next up we got Jack Humphries coming in at minus 800. I think the biggest favorite on the card. Going up against Joao dos Santos. Humphries is a guy that's been training alongside Jake Hadley throughout most of his career, and he utilizes a similar approach. He loves to take his opponents to the ground, and he likes to seek that front choke submission. He has a nice Darce, a nice anaconda choke, a good guillotine as well, but he does his best work when he's able to take his opponents to the ground. His striking still needs a little bit of work, but he does a good enough job in terms of putting enough out there in front of his takedowns so that he can eventually complete that takedown and get the fight to the mat. He had a 10-3 amateur run, ending his amateur career on a 6-fight winning streak as well. His opponent this weekend, Joao dos Santos, is 1-1 through his first 2 fights, but he's been very active as of late. He only turned pro in December and has already put together 2 fights in that amount of time. He's clearly a striker. You see it in the combinations that he throws, and even the first win that he had in his career, he was going up against a grapple-heavy fighter, and he was eventually able to work back to his feet and land a beautiful uppercut that put his opponent down and out. But it's clear he does struggle when guys can get that grapple-heavy approach going. Minus 800 is a little bit too much for me to be comfortable on Humphries here, especially considering he might be behind the 8 ball when it comes to being in the striking realm. Dos Santos has a quicker hands, has some stinging power, and if Dos Santos is able to keep this fight upright, he might be able to sting Humphries and put his lights out in the spot. But I think Humphries has enough experience, has great training partners, and I think he'll find a way to stay safe in the majority of this fight and eventually drag it to the ground, grinding Dos Santos out, and then eventually winning this on the scorecards. If I were to take a little bit of a sprinkle, plus 550 on Dos Santos is not a bad spot, especially considering the striking advantage he should have in this matchup. Minus 800, I'll stay away from, but I do think that Humphries still ends up getting his hand raised by decision. All right, Joshua Abraham coming in at plus 250, going up against Aiden Lee coming in at minus 325. Abraham was riding a 3-fight losing streak between 2018 and 2019. He set aside the gloves for a while, but returned in 2023 with a quick 23-second knockout. And that's kind of been his MO. He goes out there and he finishes opponents quickly. All 7 of his wins have come in the first round. Meanwhile, all 3 of his fights that have gone into the second and eventually to the decision, he's ended up losing. He's very fast twitch early, has some big power, has some sneaky chokes, but it's clear he starts to fall off in terms of effectiveness once fights hit that 5th or 6th minute mark. Aiden Lee is a veteran, 11-8, 19 fights, has fought for Cage Warriors in the past where he put together a 5-3 record. His last fight was actually for a vacant title, which he ended up losing. Then he ended up signing to Bellator, where he ended up going 3-3, but fought some pretty stiff competition the entire way. Lee is a solid PJJ black belt, but likes to utilize a lot of lateral movement and kicks and long-range weapons to hurt his opponents, or at least try to touch them up and win a decision on the scorecards. In this matchup, I think his lateral movement, as well as some of his grappling advantages he should hold here, will keep him safe and keep him away from the early finishing power of Abraham. And then from there, I think we'll see Lee start to run away with this in deep water. I think the over 1.5 is not a bad spot. I know Abraham normally gets the job done early, but I think he's going to struggle to touch up Lee the way he's been able to do against much lesser opponents. And that will allow Lee to really dictate the pace of this fight in the second and third rounds and likely end up winning this fight on the scorecards. At minus 325, I don't think it's a bad spot for Lee. Just have to be very careful in terms of getting away from that early finishing power of Joshua Abraham. All right, next up, we got Jason Blair coming in at minus 500, going up against Arthur's Leisans, who comes in at plus 375. Blair originally comes from a wrestling background, but let his hands go off last time around as he was able to knock out his opponent, I believe, within about 1.5 or 2 minutes of that fight kicking off. Normally, I look for him to take opponents to the ground and grind them out from that top position, but he's getting that confidence in his striking where he's able to throw with power and confidence, and that will likely end up with him getting his hand raised by knockout in certain spots. That worked against him a couple fights back when he got knocked out by I can't recall the fighter off the top of my head, but he needs to be careful in terms of not being overconfident in letting his hands go and ensuring that he just sticks with the bread and butter of his game, which is normally revolving around that wrestling style. His opponent here, Leisans, he's a brawler. He likes to go out there, really put fists on his opponents. He's 9-7 over the last 7 years. He throws bombs, showcases very poor takedown defense as well, and I think that's where we're going to see Blair really start to take over. If Blair is smart and does not let the confidence of his knockout recently get to him, he will be able to take this fight to the ground immediately, and I think he can pass to a dominant enough position quickly enough and eventually get that first round finish. So the under 1.5, not a bad way to go about it, but I do think that Blair has a significant advantage here, especially in the grappling realm, and I hope that he chooses to utilize that here and stay away from the possible Hail Mary knockout that his opponent can land here. But I'm going to go Blair and Blair round 1. Next up, we got Leon Hill coming in at minus 200, going up against Tommy Hawthorn, who comes in at plus 160. Leon Hill, one of my favorite prospects on the Cage Warrior scene, even though he's coming off of a loss against a even hotter prospect in Ewan Davies. You saw in his last victory over Dimitri Gerlin that this guy is a very dangerous prospect, especially when he's able to get opponents to the ground. He's long, lanky, but doesn't utilize his striking that well. It's just his lankiness that he utilizes on the mat to get the opponent to get the positions and the submission attempts that he needs to eventually get his opponents out of there. That loss to Ewan Davies snapped a 6-fight winning streak for him, so I think it's just a bump in the road for him at this point. But I do think that this is a spot for him to bounce back against Tommy Hawthorn, who likes to go out there and swing leather. This guy's very solid in terms of going out there and finishing his opponents quickly, although the majority of his opponents have been very low-level tomato can-esque opponents. Hawthorn, he struggles in the grappling realm, and I think that's where we see him face his most adversity. His only loss in the professional scene has been against Liam McCracken, who showcased an even slicker and more disciplined striking approach, where he eventually hurt Tommy Hawthorn and got the victory there. Hill, again, will be at a bit of a striking disadvantage, so he needs to be safe in the early going here. Otherwise, once he's able to eventually get this fight to the ground, I think he'll be able to snatch up a submission, and I think it could happen actually under that 1.5 round mark as well. All right, next up we got Kennedy Freeman coming in at minus 400, going up against Giselle Libanio, who comes in at plus 300. Freeman is the daughter of UK MMA legend Ian Freeman, and she shares the same nickname as him as well. She likes to strike. She likes to be patient with her strikes as well. But once she's able to open up see that she's opened up a hole in her opponent's game, she really starts to exploit it. She doesn't mind utilizing the clinch and battering her opponents there with her knees and elbows as well. But I think at minus 400, it's tough to be truly confident in a fighter that doesn't throw as much as she does. She, she's calculated, she's methodical, and I think, she has some solid skill. But I think that her name might precede her, especially as she continues to work through her career. Obviously Cage Warriors is going to continue to feed her winnable fights, but at a certain point, she's going to have to face somebody that's going to cause her way more issue. I thought Libby Libanio was going to be that opponent, but, considering the style that she brings, she's very physical. She looks to take opponents to the ground, smash them from that top position, grind them out. But I think she's going to struggle with the physicality that Freeman brings to the table as well. And I think that will allow Freeman to dictate where this fight takes place. So even if Libanio wants to get into the clinch with her, I think Freeman can land some knees, dig her underhooks, get some elbows going, and break off back into space, and then utilize her superior striking approach. And that's where Libanio has failed in the past. Her striking is almost no bueno, which leaves a lot of openings for her opponents to tee off on her. And that's where she starts making some mistakes, where she herself can end up on the bottom. And that's where opponents have been able to smash her in the past. So I do like Freeman here. I think she wins this fight. Again, minus 400. Tough to really get behind in this matchup, but I do think she smashes Libanio. And I think the majority of this comes through control, pace, and discipline. And I think that we'll see Freeman win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got James Power coming in at minus 400. Going up against Daniel Kolasinski, who comes in at plus 300. Power successfully rebounded from his first ever professional loss last time around, and he utilized a little bit more of a disciplined approach. Normally, we see James going out there and utilizing his power, looking to knock his opponents out and utilizing his striking advantage, but last time out against a very tough Gianluca Rocco, we saw Power engage a lot in the clinch, but he stayed active with it. He was throwing knees, dirty boxing, and then every so often he would break off, throw 3, 4, 5 punch combination with kicks as well, and then eventually engage in the clinch again, and then just rinse and repeat that. He's very physical, he's very strong, which is why he was able to be so successful in that range against his last opponent. And if he continues to improve that aspect of his game, he could be a very tough out, especially with that, continuously executing that game plan and that style. His opponent, Kolasinski, very nasty striker, fast hands, fast kicks. He's been able to land a couple of head kick knockouts as well. He's 5-1 coming into the cage warrior scene. His ground game is kind of the sore thumb in his game, but it's clear that he's working on trying to improve that. He's been taken down in the past. He's been grinded upon. He scrambles well early in fights, utilizing his butterfly hooks and looking for reversals or working for ways to get back to his feet. But if you can stay on him and stay pressuring him, he normally starts to give up those positions. And then it's harder for him to get out of those spots, allowing his opponents to really dictate the pace. And I think that's how this fight could end up happening here with James Power, matching him in the striking realm, but then really getting physical in the clinch, maybe with some takedowns as well, and then just keeping Kolasinski on the defensive for the majority of this fight. So I think we'll see Power grind him out, get a decision victory here. I had Power closer to minus 250, minus 300. So I think minus 400 is a little bit out of my the spot that I'd like to take him in. Kolasinski is talented. He could end up being one of the tougher fights for Power, but if Power brings that controlling style that we saw from him last time around, I think he'll eventually break Kolasinski, and we'll see Power grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. All right, main event time here. Like I said, vacant title on the line. Harry Hardwick coming in at minus 425, going up against Orlando Wilson Prins, who comes in at plus 325. Hardwick fights similarly to his brother George, who had his opportunity on the Contender Series last season. Ended up coming up short against Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi, but Hardwick utilizes a lot of pace, a lot of pressure, staying in his opponent's face, utilizing a lot of combinations, throwing 3, 4, 5 strikes just to keep his opponent guessing, and just spams the pressure. Just doesn't give his opponents a second to breathe. And he does great body work, digs to the body very well, utilizing that the mixture of the levels, the kicks, the body work, the head strikes, and he just utilizes it by just continuously pushing, continuously pressuring. And I think coming into his, I believe it's going to be his first 5-round fight here in Cage Warriors, we'll see it utilized even more effectively, especially as opponents start to break down later in fights due to the pace and pressure that he brings. Orlando Wilson Prince, BJJ black belt, started his career with the promotion 0-2, now finds himself on a 2-fight winning streak. He normally showcases a low volume striking style of approach, but when he's able to get opponents to the ground, his BJJ is not that bad. He does also seem like one of those guys that just settles a little bit too much on his back. allowing his opponents to kind of just dictate that control unless he's able to throw up a submission of some sort. But I'd be surprised if we see Hardwick look to take this fight to the ground. Now, Hardwick, I believe, he'll definitely have the striking advantage here, but I think his defensive grappling is good enough to keep this fight upright, where Wilson Prins is going to have to struggle in terms of keeping up with the pace and pressure of Hardwick. But again, there is a clear advantage for Prins on the ground if he's able to establish that top position, which I just don't think he'll be able to get. I think Hardwick wins this fight, and I think it actually happens under 4.5, which is where the total is currently set. I think we'll see that pace and pressure of Hardwick really catch up to Prins. Hardwick hasn't really finished many opponents on the Cage Warrior scene, but I think a lot of that also has to do with fighting 3 rounds. Fighting 5 rounds against a guy with the style of Hardwick is going to be very difficult for Prins. So look for Hardwick to eventually get a TKO on the spot. I think the under 4.5 is at a decent enough line to take a shot as well. So I think, I think we see Hardwick get the win here. Last thing here, I will say, Wilson Prins is technically coming in on short notice for this matchup specifically, but he was scheduled to fight somebody else on this card, and both him and Hardwick ended up losing their opponents, and they ended up getting matched up together here. So he does have a full training camp, just a different style that he's going up against here compared to what he was fighting before. But I still think we see Hardwick come out on top, and I think he gets a TKO in the 3rd or 4th round. There you guys go. Breakdowns for Cage Warriors 172. Again, I hate picking favorites, especially when it's pretty much the entire card. But this really feels like a spot where, most of those hometown guys are being lined up to go out there and get an emphatic victory over their opponents. That's usually the case with Cage Warriors. They usually have a lot of setup fights, especially when we have fights over there in the UK. So yeah, there might be a landmine here or there, so don't get too cocky trying to parlay all these favorites together and hoping to cash that ticket out. Just pick your spots. I got one official 3-leg parlay that I got. Obviously, I have my lock of the night play as well. I have a dog of the night play as well that you guys may have been able to pick up throughout the breakdowns here. But you can check it out on the Lock of the Night Patreon page to see where I'm at. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Monday for the UFC 302 full card breakdown as we talk about Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier, not to mention all the other great fights that's on that card. I'll see you guys on Monday. Good luck on our reaction, folks. See you then. Peace.
Last thing.